Hey guys, welcome to When Death Awaits, episode 15.
Wow.
Today's episode is called Dangerous Shoelaces. I'm so interested to hear what this one's all about. Was there a strangler? Was there someone who has choked on a shoelace? Like, what makes these shoelaces so dangerous? I just see the local news headline.
Right.
We have Uncle Rich and we've got Chris. So this case starts, I think it's June 2007, hot day. Uncle Rich, tell us where we are, what's going on, what's the backdrop here?
Well, it's around 5 in the afternoon. We have a bus stop, which I reflected in those photos we have here. And this individual, he's about 19 years old. He's stepping out of the bus because he's going to go visit a friend. He's not very familiar with the area, which is interesting.
Where are we?
We're over off of Central and like 125th or so.
So the area known as like Watts.
Technically Watts, yeah, you would call it Watts. And if you go further south, you're in the Compton area. This is the unincorporated area of the county. So, yeah, it would qualify as Watts. In the backdrop, interestingly enough, is Martin Luther King Hospital. And one of the photos depicts that. Isn't it kind of ironic that that would be there in terms of, because MLK Hospital is sort of an iconic building in that area. But that aside, this young man, he gets off the bus and he starts to walk southbound. And as he's walking southbound, he's minding his own business when he's confronted by these three young males who are, and our victim is somewhat tall. He's a little tall. He's probably about, I would say about 5'10", 5'11". Our three individuals walk up. I learned that they are in fact juveniles later on, which I'll explain. And they confront him. And one of the reasons why they confront him is because this particular area is a Crip-dominated area, and they in fact wear blue. You know, we know all that about the blue and the red, and we can start talking about the Pyrus, and we can start talking about the Crips, and the encounters that I've had over the years with these fine individuals. But let's go back to being in a Crip neighborhood.
And this one's specifically called the Carver Park Crip neighborhood, right?
Correct. Yeah, you have Corner Pocket, you have Carver Park, you have all of the other Crip gangs in that area. And it's almost street by street, believe it or not, in terms of the proliferation of these street gangs. But as our individual is walking down.
An individual, let's put a name on him. His name's Dion Miles, right?
Right, Dion. Poor Dion. He is in fact, wearing a pair of high top tennies, which have red laces. He also has a red hat. And needless to say, what I've discovered during the course of that investigation, he was not in any way associated with any street gang. Yet he apparently preferred the color red. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, everybody enjoys a particular color, but this guy, when Dion got off the bus, he didn't realize where he was. So he starts walking down and he's confronted by these three individuals. Now, I don't care what you say. I've been investigating gang murders for a long time, and I'm talking about since 1990 when I started working street gangs. And if they ask you where you're from, you've just basically been probably are going to be given a death sentence.
Oh my goodness.
Regardless of what you are or what you say, it does not matter. If somebody, as a youth, I'm going to break it out there. If you're a youth and somebody comes up to you and says, where you're from, run. Okay? That's the bottom line, because you are not going to in any way, shape, or form, it's going to end well. Just to give you a heads up on that. So he gets confronted. And at that point, I'm not sure what he said, but basically our suspect, 17-year-old, pulls out a gun and shoots him in the right temple.
Jeez.
And he just falls flat on his face. What's interesting about this is that we have two females driving up, African-American females are driving up Central, and they actually witnessed this. I don't know what are the chances of that. They look at each other and they say, did you just see that? And it's an oh my God moment, right?
Can't even imagine.
So they're like, and they know the area. Both of them live in that area. And at this point, they start to drive up to see if they could find a law enforcement officer. And sure enough, luckily within a block, they see a deputy sheriff giving a ticket.
Oh my goodness.
My God.
It's a parking ticket or
Right,
a traffic ticket?
Traffic ticket. And so they get out of the car and they say, hey, look what we just witnessed. Deputy turns to them and says, let me finish the ticket
Oh
first.
my goodness.
I just like, really?
Yeah.
That's what they're telling me. So
I
at
mean,
this
if there was any reason to hate a parking meter and meter maids even more, this case doesn't help.
I'll tell you. And at this point, the deputy goes around, and then a crime scene containment is in fact established. Now, what's interesting about this particular crime scene is that if you go westbound, I believe it's on 123rd. If you go, or 125th, if you go westbound, there's like a horseshoe street. And the backdrop again is MLK right behind it. So, and then it basically deposits you back onto 125th. So that becomes relevant because at this point, like I mentioned, we have one shell casing. And when I get there, an hour later, crime scene has been established. I understood there was two witnesses, those two females there at the station. And so I had always been a strong believer. A lot of the guys at the office didn't believe in these dogs. And to be candid with you, I a lot of times use the dogs to just extend my time at the crime scene. If for no other reason, just to see what I could come up with while I'm waiting around.
And you're talking about law enforcement sniffing dogs that are they on staff or what's do you guys just have dogs that are trained and ready to go? Like how does that work?
Okay, technically, this is sad.
Oh gosh.
This is really sad. I hate to give you a horrific story, but I will. Okay, so we have Ted Ham. Actually, he was a volunteer, but he got paid. And he would come in and he would bring his dogs, and he had like 3 of them. Can't remember their names now. Nice guy, Ted, but he was volunteer. He since has retired. And so they were volunteer dogs, and he loved his hound dogs. There were those dogs with the floppy ears and so forth. And so you've seen them, a lot on TV. I don't know if you saw Cool Hand Luke, where
like the bloodhounds?
The bloodhounds, exactly. Okay. And they've got a ability, according to Ted, like a 5,000 times more powerful scent than the regular dogs, even though dogs have real good scent. But on one occasion, I just want to go off on a tangent here for a second. The sheriff's department actually decided to do their own training, which is a very good question, Aura. They decided to do their own training. So they bring this deputy in, and I was an unrelated case, and it's 2:00 in the morning, and this guy shows up with his dog, full-fledged, honest, I won't give you his name. And he's got the dog, it's like maybe 8 months old. And it's a little dog, a little bloodhound. And the dog is not doing what it's supposed to do. Now, Ted is like the most patient person with his dogs. This guy, at 3:00 in the morning, mind you, it's Compton. People are awake 24 hours a day.
Okay.
This deputy grabs this dog and with his boots just goes kapow!
Oh gosh.
Kicks the dog. The dog goes up in the air. I'm like, really?
Oh, my goodness.
Even the citizenry were like, hey man, leave the dog alone.
Oh, no.
I'm like, what? I'm like,
terrible.
what?
I'm curious what would happen if a dog was wearing red in that neighborhood.
What would
Anyways,
happen?
so
Probably not get kicked. I think
No.
the dogs have a
that's
special
terrible.
place.
I love dogs. So so Ted shows up. And what they do basically is they get this gauze, and I've done it, countless times, but I used to love Ted coming on my cases. And what you do is you pick up the shell casing with the gauze, and then he has this machine that sucks the air, any scent, because on the pretense that our suspect pushed the bullets into the magazine and that would have the scent. So that's the amazing part about that. So you think about that,
Yeah.
I mean, because generally speaking, and again, we've talked about this before, is that generally you're not going to find fingerprints on shell casings or guns or anything.
But this would be the oils.
Right, the oil's the scent of somebody, right? That's how strong it is. So Ted does that, and at this point, he slaps it on the nose of the dog and just creams it all over him, And now he tells the dog, okay, let's go. So now there's like 3 deputies, and of course I'm following in my car. So, and I'm thinking, all right, let's go see if we can get something, right? And so we start to drive west, and then we go up onto that
This is, an hour after it was called into you, right?
Right.
Okay.
So we're talking maybe about 2 hours now we're into the investigation.
Okay.
So the dog starts to walk up, and everybody's following the dog. We got 3 or 4 deputies following, and I'm in my car, and I'm too lazy to get out of my car.
So you're just slowly following while the
Basically, yeah, just to have something to do while I wait. I'm not going to sit there and say, okay, let me see what happens, guys.
Yeah, Scooby-Dooing. Yeah.
So like the dog starts to walk, and it goes up onto that street, and then it deposits back down. And now it starts walking back. And I'm like, this dog ain't working, right?
Yeah.
So then there's this group of young, very docile-looking African-American teenagers standing right there. And the dog stops. And I'm like, okay. And I'm like, no way. These guys are involved, right?
Yeah.
So, but the dog stops, and one of the deputies goes, do you want me to take their names down? Yeah, take their names down, because in case they could be witnesses later, right? So then the dog comes back, takes off. Again, the dog's amazing, right? So now I continue with my investigation. And again, the issue of the dog becomes so much of an issue because in many instances it's been challenged in court.
Right.
For instance, can I use the dog as probable cause? I mean, Your Honor, I want to let you know that, Lucky took me to this house.
Right. I guess the question there is like, what's the efficacy rate of these bloodhounds tracking down the scent? Like, what's the success rate?
It's a tool.
Yeah.
That can be used, but the courts have allegedly deemed it not a viable tool.
Got it.
To the extent it went to the Supreme Court.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and Alito actually wanted to bring it on to the floor of the Supreme Court. And this is what I was told by one of the DAs. It was one of my cases, another case out of La Puente.
That went up to the Supreme Court
Yeah.
that Justice Alito reviewed.
Yeah.
Wow.
And he wanted to throw it on there and let everybody else discuss it,
Yeah.
but they say we're not gonna have any kind of
They're not
viability.
there yet. Yeah.
We're venturing off into something completely different here.
Gotcha.
So I never was able to get a probable cause warrant based on a dog's.
Right, and you need probable cause to execute a search warrant
Right.
or even an arrest warrant.
Exactly.
So. Gotcha. Okay, so what did you do?
So after I did that, I went to the station, interviewed these young ladies, and while I was there, I heard over the speaker, Detective Ramirez, you have a phone call, and I said, okay. So I get on the phone, and it's this neighbor, and he goes, I don't want to reveal my identity, but I live next door to those kids that you just interviewed, and the one individual, and he gave me the name, is in fact the person I saw shoot the guy and run back into the house.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, wow. And sure enough, I look at my field interview cards that have been created, and at this point now the investigation ventures into a whole different realm because now I'm going to put I have the identity, I have a photo, and now I'm going to create a photographic 6-pack array in hopes of these 2 young ladies to identify them. And sure enough, they did.
A 6-pack array is like basically you line up 6 individuals,
Right.
and it's an
And they have to be of similar looking.
Right.
Otherwise, you can't get, 3 white guys and a Mexican and then a little black guy, and there's just not going to work. You have to have a similar looking individuals.
Right.
So that said, they identified him.
Wow.
So now, because there was a gun used, I have to use our SWAT team. But we first have to establish whether he lives at that location. So now mind you, this is like 4 days later, and I'm like, let's park it. I had a surveillance team. So you could see all of the tools I have to use in order to, finally get this fine citizen in custody. And so what I did was have surveillance go to the house, and they sat there at 3 o'clock in the morning because we're going to do a night service search warrant on the house. Our surveillance, a gal and a guy, our undercovers, are sitting in front of the house, and they hear gunshots. This is mind you, like 2 weeks later, bah, 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 like 15 shots.
What time is this at?
Like 3 o'clock in the morning, because we're about to do a 4 o'clock hit.
Oh my goodness.
And here comes our juvenile suspect running into the house.
Back into the house.
With a gun in his hand. And I'm like, all right. And so finally we get our SWAT team. The Sheriff's Department calls it Special Enforcement Bureau. They respond, and they end up, hitting the house and executing a search warrant that I had authored. And ultimately, they got our juvenile suspect in custody, and his uncle, because his uncle was a parolee, and he was also in possession of a firearm as well.
Wow.
So, enter now, kid's 17 years old, got overwhelming evidence, up to including the gun, believe it or not. The search warrants are amazing in terms of what we got going on. And we go to court, and he is tried as an adult. So it's interesting, and I don't want to go off on a tangent here, but the previous district attorney refused to prosecute anybody as an adult, even though it's a California law, but the previous DA did not want it. So if you were 17 and you committed a murder, you're probably going to do maybe 2 to 3 years at the most. But this was the prior regime, and they ended up convicted him, and he ended up getting 30 years in prison.
Was that just for this Darius Miles case?
Right.
Or because you also mentioned there was that other shooting that before the arrest warrant, before you guys actually took him in, that he was running from. Was there anything tied there? Or
I hope not, because I didn't want any more paperwork.
I do not
know.
Wow.
I do not know.
Yeah.
We were kind of focused. That's a good question. Why I didn't follow up on that.
Yeah.
Hopefully nobody was hurt, and thank you for bringing that up.
No, hey, no problem. I also accidentally called him Darius Miles, who's an old Clippers legend. His name is actually Dion Miles, and Dion is the victim here.
Exactly.
But to think that he killed someone, within 2-week periods, right? Or at least gunshots running.
Right.
I mean,
right. Exactly. And it's a really sad commentary on. My thinking is, and I've unfortunately had the misfortune of arresting a lot of, 15, 16, 17-year-olds for, to use the street vernacular, hot ones. These kids are, in fact, we charge them with murder, and they end up going to prison for years, not knowing what life is going to be like post, 18 years old, and now their whole life has just been thrown away. And so you have to ask yourself, and I don't want to go off on another tangent, but you have to ask yourself, what motivates a 16, 17-year-old to kill somebody to the extent of not realizing there's potential consequences? Mm-hmm. And I could go into the gang culture, the gang mentality, and the issues of notoriety and the desire to be popular and have some kind of notorious or nefarious reputation, especially if you catch the chain and go to the joint. You want to have that reputation that that you are, in fact, the badass of the street. And I've seen it time and again. And it's all an illusion, because once you get to the joint and you're 17, 18 years old, those big homies are just going to take advantage of you.
Well, there's probably so much we can talk about in terms of why young men join gangs in particular neighborhoods. There's probably safety elements. There's probably power elements, as you said, and those dynamics don't end in the civilian world. They also extend into prison life. A lot of them, it seems like, are prepared from previous cases we talked about. They know they're going to go to jail, and you go in jail, you've got a safety net support group of other gang members that can support you or protect you, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that is, I'd love to have you talk to a gang psychologist on the pod here to go more and more into the psychology of it all. Is remarkable. But what's really sad about this case in particular is, like, you have a 19-year-old who's going to visit a friend, doesn't know any better. For those who aren't indoctrinated or familiar, the Bloods and the Crips growing up here in Los Angeles, you always heard about, you don't wear red in a certain territory, you don't wear blue in a certain territory. This guy was just wearing shoelaces that were red, and he had a red hat. I saw Washington Nationals hat. And walks out, and all of a sudden, like, someone is questioning where he's from. Doesn't matter where. It could be, I mean, I could come out and just, he could be from Pakistan for all that matters.
Exactly.
And this guy is conditioned and predisposed, I guess, to some extent at this level, to just shoot you in the head and end your life without thinking about what's going to happen to him. He's had to have known multiple people who've gone to jail for similar actions, but
it's almost like certain attributes, right? Maybe it's like how many deaths, like you said, if they've been to prison or not.
Yeah, I agree. I think reputation plays large into that gang culture. To the extent, you're going back to the issue of prisons. I've been to every prison in the state of California, from Calipatria down to the south end, all the way to Pelican Bay to the north end. And in fact, that is alive and well in terms of reputation. So when in fact you develop that type of reputation, you're hoping that it's going to translate when you hit the yard. Because you're absolutely right, Omar, is that it does have a direct correlation between the streets and the prisons, because they almost believe it's inevitable that they're going to end up in the joint. It's sad, but nonetheless, it's a reality of that whole street mentality. So when he takes this guy out, he's basically saying, hey, here I am. Whatever happens, and he throws his life away like that,
Yeah. Would you say this was, in terms of investigation, on the easier side? Because you had eyewitness, those two ladies. You had the neighbor who has seen this kid doing stuff before. You had that bloodhound that came through super clutch. And then you had the SWAT team. You got the search warrant. You had that second suspicious activity with the gunshots of the kid running in.
Mm-hmm.
It was just on the easier side?
Yes, the investigation part of it, the court proceedings was not. Evidently, LAPD's got a number of individuals that go and start working for the defense. And this particular individual, he had a one-name card. And I was like, Cher. This guy... And he had retired from LAPD, wore a ponytail. I won't even give you his name. I don't want to give him any kind of credibility. But he's walking around.
I see a nice TV series spinning out on this guy.
And he's going over and basically contacting all my witnesses.
Oh my goodness.
To try and turn discredit the information they provided. And it's a really sad commentary, because they actually get up there and they actually will testify on behalf of the defendant and try to do anything and everything they can in terms of trying to basically overturn
expose. That's why it's so important for you to follow the procedure, make sure you're following the proper protocols, because people like that, and maybe there's a good utility and function that makes you have to follow the rules, because there's a reason the rules are there in the procedure and the evidence proceedings. Maybe it's keeping you a little more vigilant on following the rules so that the proper protocols are followed in court. But it sounds like this guy is making a career and a living off of just kind of really trying to poke holes and expose what's like the breaking the evidentiary lines.
Yeah, it's fascinating you say that. And again, I had him on a couple of cases where he walked in with his little ponytail, and it was kind of funny. But that aside,
What color was the ponytail?
but what was funny was there was another case. I kid you not, and I don't want. And then we'll discuss this. But another LAPD guy came in working for the defense, and he testified that my investigation was a complete, farce, and that, this guy should go free and so forth and so on. At the end of that trial, I received a commendation. I'd never seen this. I don't know if anybody else has. From the jury. All 12 juries signed this commendation that said that despite all of the attacks that Detective Ramirez had, that we, so saith all, that he did a fantastic job and so forth and so on. I'm like, wow. I didn't even think about that. That wasn't what I was thinking. I was like, hey, why is this guy attacking me? I don't even know him.
Yeah.
But again, we could go into all, especially when it comes to gang cases.
Yeah.
But a testament to your good work. Fine work.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate that. But the bottom line is you have to go through all of that anxiety, all of that, issues that they're trying to in some way, discredit. And so to me, it's just part of the job, the nature of the job. So when we talk about this case, so that component, the court proceeding component, when you talk about it, it does have a whole heck of a lot of trials and tribulations, no pun intended.
Yeah.
Yes, it does.
We need to get Mr. Ponytail on the podcast. Get him face to face with Uncle Rich.
I think it's
Oh, no. You want to hear that? A funny story? So I get in this freight elevator, because we used to get the freight elevator, right? So I'm in the freight elevator, and the door opens, and it's him.
Oh,
this is after all these.
man.
And I'm standing behind him, and he's like, what am I going to do? Pop you in the back of the head? Stop,
Grab the ponytail.
So be shorter. Okay.
That's amazing. Well, to put a bow on this, I have one last question.
Sure.
So growing up in LA, you always heard in school about Bloods and Crips, and kids have their own way of like talking about it and pretending and playing, and I grew up in an affluent suburban neighborhood, so it was very like silly now thinking back on like how we're talking about this when we're so far away. But now here we are. This case was 2007. I'm talking about now 2025. I know you're retired, not as much in it, still have a lot of ties. What is the current state of like, and this could be a long answer, I want to make it somewhat quick because we're wrapping up, but
Right.
What is like the current state of the Bloods and the Crips in LA?
It's still very much in existence. It's just not as prevalent, to the extent, I might add, despite some of the issues. I keep using the word issues, but in terms of some of the media attention that's going on, the murder rate has actually dropped considerably over the last 20 years.
That's great.
And I attribute that, believe it or not, to deterrence. And what I mean by that, if we talk about this case, the last thing we want to do is do something like this and end up in prison for 30 years. So when you start to take these guys away, suddenly it sends that resounding message that, hey, we don't want to be involved. Now, I drive through LA and I still see gang graffiti, and a lot of times, that type of writing on the walls, there's a reflection that it potentially could start to resurface. But I haven't seen it. And trust me, you brought up a good point, Omar, and that is that I am still in the circle. I still teach. I still work with these guys, and many of my associates, believe it or not, for whatever reason, still want to keep working. And I don't know why, but nonetheless, and they're at the forefront of this fight. And the reality is that it is not as prolific as it was. Especially when I started in 2000, we actually, August of 2000, I think I've mentioned this before, we actually had Compton. We acquired the city of Compton. We took over their law enforcement services, which at that time, ironically, is the same time that I went officially to homicide. And prior to that, I was working a task force with homicide. Point being is that between 2000 and 2007, 8, we had just an astronomical amount of murders that were going on over there.
Wow.
Unbelievable. And so it's not as pervasive as it was back then.
And do you think that is just because of a lot of this more community outreach or education about gang violence?
I think that does have an impact. It's funny, teaching, I see a lot of kids that, in fact, are sons and daughters of individuals that I've, in fact, had come in contact with by way of gangs. So it's interesting that I think it does have some level of impact. But the reality is, the murder rate is not as prolific. You probably see it on the news. You'll hear of a murder, one or two,
But not as many.
yeah, I mean, on average, we were averaging about 450 murders just in LA County alone.
Wow.
You know,
Related to gang violence.
70% of it was.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's per year?
Yeah, per year. And that was just LA County. So it's not as bad as it was. I mean, I read the news all the time, in terms of keeping on top of stuff.
Do you know where we are now in terms of that number?
I would say it's probably about at least 60% reduction.
Oh, amazing.
But there's still robberies and things of that nature
Yeah.
that are gang related, as they refer to them as licks. Lick is in fact like a burglary or a robbery.
Lick.
And yeah, so that being said,
That's a gang term or that's a cop term?
It's a gang term.
Oh, okay.
Lick.
Yeah. So here I am enlightening you guys.
Yeah, that's amazing. You need to start incorporating that.
All right, everyone. Well, we are actually going to be talking about our new Have You Heard segment. And so this is where we're going to be talking about cases that are making headlines right now, new legal updates, cultural impact, or ongoing debates that are going on today in the world. So the first one that we're going to be talking about is the Menendez brothers. This is a murder that happened in 1989. It's a family murder or justified revenge is what's kind of going on right now. So a little bit of background is the Menendez brothers, Eric and Lyle, they were 18 and 21 at the time. They murdered their parents, Jose and Kitty Menendez, with a Mossberg shotgun. And this was at their Beverly Hills home. The brothers had two trials, both tried for first-degree murder. The first trial, they focused on acting in their self-defense. So they were saying that they were abused by their father, Jose, but the juries didn't know if this was abuse or manslaughter. The second case, however, the abuse evidence was a bit more limited, and so they convicted Lyle and Eric for murder to life in prison in 1996. So, however, the major updates today and what we're going to be watching from this clip is, so Netflix has kind of brought this back into light. It's brought a lot of interest for re-examination. The Los Angeles District Attorney's Office currently right now is reviewing new evidence presented by the brothers saying that Eric allegedly wrote a letter to his cousin 8 months before the murder saying that Jose was abusing him. And then there's new evidence currently right now that a member of the boy band Menudo was actually raped by Jose, who was a big music executive at the time who had signed him. So why don't we cue up this clip right now? This is going to be a little bit of the trailer for the Menendez brothers on Netflix right now. Wow. So do you think these were abused victims fighting back or cold-blooded killers?
I'll go with the latter.
Oh,
And I will tell you this, if in fact they were, there's other alternatives than to grab that shotgun as you described and blow your parents away. And the issue, of course, is the father, who was allegedly the one that was doing this. And by the way, this did not surface until we had a trial. So I understand there's a level of sympathy and empathy for these fine young men who are now in their 50s and completely bald. But the biggest issue I have with this is that, first and foremost, they had the option of reporting this. But they didn't report it until they became adults, okay? And that was by way of the trial. No one ever mentioned that they were, in fact, molested prior to. None. Think about that. And so when I see Lyle up there, and by the way, I was living during the course, I was there at courthouse all the time because I had other cases going on. But what I found particularly interesting was the tears that Lyle had were not tears because he had been molested. They're tears because he was about to go to prison for the rest of his life. Now, going fast forward to today's dynamic, one of the things that is happening is that the district attorney has in fact evaluated that case, while Gascon, the previous DA, he wanted to highlight it in order to get some level of notoriety because, ironically, it was very close to the election. So he figured he would raise his profile that way. And I see that a lot of times with district attorneys, and I won't go into specific stories, but I'm just saying that's ironic that that was happening at the time. So, secondly, and more importantly, and Holcomb, the new district attorney, has said that there are so many other cases similar to this. And if we have an equitable distribution of justice, every other case should be looked at and reevaluated. Why are we looking at this this case, which to a large extent is that, that influenza is, or what is that term?
Viral?
No, the term that they use where somebody is from an affluenza.
Influenza.
And in that regards, that's the only reason why this case is coming to light. That's the only reason why they, in fact, are being put in a position where they could, in fact, gain notoriety. And lastly, and more importantly, the mother did nothing to these kids, but they blew her away too. Really? And here's the interesting thing in terms of investigations. And I've done a lot of domestic cases, okay? When I get to a house and I see two people dead and there's no level of forced entry, the first people I'm going to look at, and granted, there's multiple ways of looking at it, are the people that they live with, okay? And then you work your way out. But those are the first people they look at. But instead, I guess you guys didn't do this. Go off and start spending mom and dad's money. And they did, with impunity.
Wow.
I mean, so I'm sorry, but I know I'm very sort of engaged and emotionally distraught over the fact that these people would in some way somehow be able to get exonerated from something like this because on the pretense that they were in some way molested.
To play the other side, I'm curious to find out, and I haven't been following this closely, but in terms of the new evidence or the new accusations, these were young guys when this happened, right? And I don't know if it's ineffective assistance or effectual counsel. Like, were their lawyers just bad? Were they nefarious? Was there stuff going on with the DA at the time, or with the prosecution or the defense? Were there like nefarious things going on that these boys weren't represented the proper way at trial, or was the proper evidence brought forth? Those are the questions I ask whenever it's like, oh, new evidence.
Yeah.
Like, were they taken advantage of or treated wrongly? That's where I'm curious, and I don't know if there's anything of that. I haven't looked long and hard enough, but I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Absolutely, I do. We had the blow-by-blow experience while out, because I was in law enforcement at the time. Leslie Abrams, probably one of the more accomplished defense attorneys that this county could, in fact, produce. And she went out there and put everything out there to the extent that it came back as a hung jury. Because she threw out the old molestation thing. Hey, we have to do something. If you can't fight the evidence, attack the victims. And that's exactly what she did. And the mother thing, as far as the Lyle and Eric's mom, apparently they were saying that, she was just complicit by way of not preventing this from happening.
Yeah, I'm curious to see if she knew about what was going on, but what I think I find most interesting is I saw something recently in the news from their lawyer saying that he hopes and thinks that they'll be out by Thanksgiving, for Thanksgiving dinner this year. So there's a few new things that are kind of popping up right now, but I mean, a murder is a murder.
I'm going to disagree with that. What's his name? Garagos. Garagos helped Peterson's case. He always likes these high-profile cases because it raises his profile.
He represented famously like Winona Ryder and the shoplifting. He represented Michael Jackson.
Chris Brown.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so, he's always trying to in some way spin this so that, I hate to say this, and I no, offense to the Menendez family who are trying to get him out, but they're going to scratch him a large check in order to keep him, fed so that he could be around for this whole experience, coupled with the fact that he will, in fact, be his profile will be raised. So that's what they live for in terms of that. So, and I could go into many other attorneys who love that sort of catapulting themselves by way of the misery of others.
Yeah.
So,
He was also on the defense team for OJ, right?
No, I don't remember
Was
him.
he not?
No, he was not.
Okay.
That was Shapiro
And
and Johnny
Kardashian.
Cochran and all
Yeah.
those
Well,
other fine folks.
well, interestingly enough, so actually, the Menendez brothers are, I believe, in the same cell block as OJ was,
Back
right? They
then,
they
yeah.
were right next to each
Right,
other.
yeah, they were down in 1750, which is our high security area for the county jail. It's just funny. You go into the gate,
Wow.
and they're so funny. One time, I took my son to the county jail for a tour. I was still working, so I get there. The deputy goes, "Here's the keys. Go wherever you want to go."
Bring your son to work day.
And I wasn't working there at the time, so I opened the gate to the high, they call it, I'll remember, it's a high security area, but and that's 1700 and 1750.
Wow.
But anyways, make a long story short, that's where they were, and it's a jail within a jail within a jail. It literally is. You cannot come out of there. You got to break through like 4 walls before
Wow.
you get to there.
Well,
So.
I say let's talk about the O.J. Simpson case. I think we've seen that just kind of become just as popular right now as the Menendez brothers, as we see the few Netflix documentaries, docuseries. So that's something that I'm sure you have a lot to talk about and discuss in that case as well.
In that case, we could look at this.
Yeah, let's go ahead and start the clip and then let's talk about it.
It doesn't fit. If it doesn't fit, you must acquit.
So the trial that divided America, I mean, this lasted for over 11 months and live too.
Yeah.
That's
By the way,
almost-
before we get into it, I think it's crazy that there's been so much content about this trial recently. Like there was that FX
It's
series
the
like a
biggest
few
in
years
pop
ago.
culture, yeah.
There was that one documentary. I forget what it's called. But that was another, like, at that time there was a documentary and then the TV show that sort of relived it. And now Netflix, and maybe this discussion should be more about Netflix. Netflix puts another documentary. There's no new evidence. It's just another fresh perspective. And it's #2 on Netflix and everyone's talking about it
Yeah.
again. Like, it's almost funny to me that like Sky News comes out to the US to like cover this again. I guess maybe it's outside of America still kind of interesting, but I feel like this is the case that like just keeps feeding Hollywood every like
Absolutely.
5 years.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I go back to that argument that when you have something like this, in the case of domestic case, you always want to start from the inside. So Mark Furman, who was one of the investigators, he actually wasn't the primary investigator, but he literally, I think to a large extent, was put the fly in the ointment in terms of why this case ultimately ended up as a not guilty verdict. They didn't say innocent, remember, not guilty, and that's the issue that we come into play with. But I'll just say this, on a personal note, the gloves, the bloody glove thing, and of course they didn't fit, and of course if the glove don't fit, you must acquit, right? Well, the individual that made that decision was a guy by the name of Christopher Darden. That led to his basically being ousted from the district attorney's office. But let me put it to you in context, okay? And I just want to fast forward. This is on a personal note. So he was trying to convict, and regardless of what, the notoriety of this case, he's trying to convict a domestic violent suspect. Well, I have a case out of Monterey Park wherein this Chinese individual kills his wife in front of their 4-year-old. The defense attorney in that case was none other than Christopher Darden. And I get to talking with him, right, at trial, right, because we're, a lot of times there's a lot of dead time. And he goes, well, if the district attorney takes me back, I'll go back. I'm like, really? Come on.
Wow.
Stop it. Anyways, going back to the issue. One of the things, if you notice on this trial, is Kardashian. You see that Johnny Cochran is happier than a lark in terms of that him getting a not guilty verdict. Look at Kardashian's face, and he is
I
like,
did notice, yeah.
he's like, oh my God. I'm like, are you kidding me? But again, the issue, as far as I'm concerned, was that one major contributing factor of this whole thing. And if you look back at it, and I watched this trial from the time it started all the way until the finish,
Wow.
was Mark Furman. That really, and by the way, I might add, nobody knows this, but one of the more integral aspects of this case was they changed the venue. It was supposed to be held in Santa Monica court, but they changed the venue and put it in downtown LA, which changed the demographic of the jury selection. And again, I don't know whether he would have been found not guilty in Santa Monica, but ironically, when they did the civil trial, every last allegation was in fact found with the preponderance of evidence. As a result, he owed the Goldmans, what, $33 million? And he never paid one penny because he ran off to Florida where he was apparently protected by way of his assets. So we can look at all of these aspects. There's so many. You just hit the nail on the head. I mean, they got so many programs and how many other tentacles to this case are. And then he wrote that book, If I Did It.
Yeah.
You know, come on, stop it. You know, you would figure he would just slowly drift into the night. And there was the most iconic video I saw was he was on a pier, I think in Santa Monica or something, and this female Caucasian walks up to him. She goes, you know, like all excited. And she says, "I've never shook a hand of a murderer before."
Oh my goodness.
That sounds like a TikTok influencer viral trying to gain some clicks and views to go and troll people.
Here he's thinking, you know, he's just a celebrity, but no, on the contrary, you know, he was reviled here.
I mean, there's just so much with that case, with race, with the backdrop of the Rodney King, with his celebrity, with, you know, where he lived, who he lived with, the Bronco, the chase. It just really had it all. So it's no surprise that it's the gift that keeps on giving to Hollywood.
I agree.
It just keeps blowing my mind. I feel like, you know, Hollywood's all about like remakes, and you're getting already getting like action hero Marvel fatigue going on, but there's like no OJ fatigue.
Right.
Give it 2-3 years, there's another documentary and it'll be at the top of the charts. It's amazing.
No, yeah. Like I said, I had and Marsha Clark, of course, she went on to leave the DA's office and start her own little crime program. And again, you know, my argument is that you guys lost this case and you still had notoriety, you know. And Marsha Clark took a lot of grief from Johnny Cochran and all of the other dream team, as they were referred to as. I mean, and then that that DNA attorney, I can't remember his name offhand now, but he just confused. And that was the most accomplished aspect of that, was he confused the heck out of the jury. I mean, think about it. You literally have to be a biologist to understand the components associated with DNA. Now here you have all these laymen who, in fact, I don't know anything about DNA, but, you know, the alleles and the probability and so forth and so on.
Yeah.
You know, you're going to go to sleep.
It almost felt like it was more theater. Like when I look
mean,
back
that is trial. Like most cases settle prior to trial because everyone says you don't know what's going to happen when you get to trial, because who knows how the jury is, who knows how good the counsel is. It can go any which way.
Yeah,
it is theater. Yeah,
I agree. Right. And trials are funny. I mean, they go off literally. I didn't realize it, but when you start going to these court proceedings, I don't know, maybe it's out of boredom, but they truly do find some level of interest in their own way, because you're literally detached from reality. You know, we talk about the previous case in terms of that, you know, on Central Avenue. I mean, we saw everything that went on and so forth and so on, but now you figure it's going to be sort of a sanitized version of what happened. But yet there's antics that go on in the courtroom.
Yeah. If you're a fan of Hollywood and theater, you watch a trial. If you're a fan of the law and justice, you check out an appellate court
there you go.
Decision.
And thank you everyone as well for joining us here on When Death Awaits on Have You Heard. Make sure to like and subscribe, drop us a comment, and let us know what you think. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you guys.
Thanks a lot.